All right. One of the advantages, and there are many, of being in my 50s is that I got to be a young adult in the 80s and 90s. Okay, barely. We all think we're adults, right? But I am now talking about life in the 80s and especially the 90s, starting with 1989, and I was 18 then. My career path took off from that year onwards. What an incredible time it was in the world, too. Not saying it was better, but it was maybe more hopeful and more progressive in a lot of ways. And this despite the fact that 1989 was 2 years after the first coups that happened in Fiji and completely changed the way other people saw Fiji, the way people outside of Fiji saw Fiji. It was no longer just the hospitality industry darling. It wasn't just the paradise. There was a little bit of a paradox there. But anyway, 1989. And I had been in boarding school in 1987 and 1988. So I had been away from Fiji during all that time because we weren't allowed to go home. My father was in politics, so I didn't get to see home, my family, my friends, my mother for over 2 years. But anyway, 1989, and this is where it all started for me. For me, my first love for my career, for everything that I do, is radio. I love radio, and that's where I started. My first experience with radio was when I was 12 and I got chosen to be part of the group of children representing our school on Auntie Adi's afternoon. It was Auntie Adelaide Karoy. And on Sundays, I think, or one days, but we had to record it, pre-record it during the week. It was, children's opinions. And I think Art Linkletter also had that program, Kids Say the Darndest Things. So then we also had Auntie Adi. And we got to, speak about the things that we were all, focusing on in school and Form 2 at that time, etc. And it was very exciting. I took my choice, being chosen very responsibly. It was a huge responsibility for me because I have loved radio since I was a baby. I remember having a little transistor radio in a red leather or plastic or case, and I remember just being I wasn't we were inseparable. That and a little barking dog, a puppy, yap yap yap, everything, and also the little transistor radio. So I have had a love of radio since I was a baby. So at 12, when I was asked to do this, and I was a student council representative. Hello, as if I wouldn't be, and I just knew I loved being on radio. It was a huge responsibility. This is how we got to listen and learn and share information. So at 18, when I went back to Fiji after being away, and I had been studying speech and drama in boarding school, and I knew that I had a talent. I was an orator in school. I always asked to speak at assembly. And prior to that, in boarding school, before boarding school, I was at Suva Grammar School Represent. I was always dancing and performing, etc., etc. So people do know me. If you do remember me from that time, then you know me to be someone who has always been doing what I do now in my 50s. 1989, radio. I, with all the audacity of an 18-year-old young woman who is just, so sure of herself, but also I was just choosing to lead with confidence at that stage. And I had already been known in Suva especially as being a bit of a fashion plate. So people knew me from 13, 14 as that girl who's always dressed up. So when I walked into FBC, the Fiji Broadcasting Commission, which it was known as then, I think it's Fiji Broadcasting Corporation now. When I walked into FBC, I said, I'd like to be on air, please. And I have some experience. I didn't, but I know what I'm doing. I didn't, but audacity, right? You've just got to have that confidence. You really do. And I remember, what do I remember? Semi Karoy, a legend of Fiji radio on English language station. And that was RF3. And he said, okay, well, come into the studio. And we just yapped, and I remember going to the studio and it was like, oh my God, it's all very quiet and cold back, through the the corridors of FBC studios at that time. I don't know what it looks like now. Actually, I do. It's quite different. But back then, that's all very clear for me. And I was in the studio, and I remember what I was wearing because I used to wear a lot of saris, but I also used to wear sari tops, just as tops with tight skirts, etc. 80s fashion, so good. And I had a great time. We were just bantering, and Semi Karoy said to me, "You are very good." And I don't remember how this happened, but then all of a sudden I was employed by FBC, and I was on radio, and I took this job seriously, well, as seriously as an 18-year-old, young woman can. In back then, Suva, wow, back then Suva was, I guess every generation can say that of their time, of their town, but Suva was extra special late 80s and 90s. I think also because of all the curfews we had in place. So everything was a little bit more precious. And I think this was also our rebellion, because the coups had happened and the world thought of us as just these, little island people fighting amongst themselves. And those of us in tropopolitan areas like Suva and Nandi, we were like, we are creatives, hello. And so the creativity in Suva in the 80s, late 80s, but of course way before that too, and 90s was through, off the charts, through the roof, etc., etc. So 1989, I was on radio. This was a big deal. I have quite vivid memories of what I can remember, and there's a lot I can't remember. And of course, there is a lot that is missing. Even the archives in FBC, what FBC is now, they don't have memories and archives of what went on before. Also around that time, we had Radio Rock FM. And I'm not quite sure when FM 96, the rival radio station, came to being. But I do remember thinking, well, you're not quite as good as us announcers at FBC, hello. But they were okay. But they were the cool kids on the block, the new kids on the block. And I remember that it was all very much them thinking that all of us at FBC, we were all just, fuddy-duddies. And I'm like, I don't think so. We would be playing obscure music. And music from all over the world. And as we talked about on another program called The Riff, which is our music show, back then, Fiji, we had our music influences from England, United States, and Australia. It was smash hits and countdown and the top 40, weekly top 40. So we were all very knowledgeable about music and the music industry in Fiji, all the local bands. Okay, these were rock stars. These were people playing heavy metal and jazz. Jazz and rock was huge in Fiji in the 80s and 90s. So I loved being on radio, being able to share obscure music or, cool music, trending music, whatever. I had my theme song. I think it's "She's a Lady. Whoa, 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 she's a lady." Sorry about that, but actually this is a precursor to what's going to come next. Around this time, of course, I was still... I have been known mainly and firstly because of my voice over the airwaves. That is how I came to national renown, just by my voice. I was one of the few Indo-Fijian people, if very, very, very few, on English language station. And I took that job very seriously. But of course, the way I sounded back then was a little bit more whatever it is I sound like now. And I guess people didn't realize that I was Indo-Fijian. Cut to a few months down the track in 1989, I then got discovered by legends of the Fiji fashion industry, strutting my stuff down Victoria Parade because, hello, Victoria Parade was my catwalk. That's what we called it back then, not runway, catwalk. So I was discovered by Tanya Whiteside and Anna Sweetman, people I still hold in high regard now, and I have still got contact with them. Anna Sweetman was the fashion organizer of the time and the one responsible for really expanding what could be done on Fiji runways, catwalks we call them. And so she discovered me and was my first agent, and Tanya Whiteside was the heir to the iconic Tiki Togs. By the way, that is what I am wearing right now, and an ensemble, late 80s, Tanya Whiteside for Tiki Togs. And I guess you should be seeing photographs of that right now. It's a deliciously lovely pink, with a jacket and a strapless dress and belt. and it's got a wonderful print on it created by Tanya Whiteside, I think. But the main artist creating all of that for Tiki Togs was a man by the name of Ben Stowers, and he did have someone else designing the prints with them. So predominantly the prints created for Tiki Togs was by Ben Stowers. Anyway, so going back to that, so this was Tiki Togs, and Tiki Togs was the fashion house. Fiji has had a fashion industry, well, or fashion society since about 60s, I think, and 70s and 80s especially. It was a fairly big deal. Now, not a lot of Indo-Fijian young women were modeling, not because they weren't able or suitable, but perhaps the families were a bit more strict on them than my family was on me. Actually, my family was also quite strict and traditional. I refused to toe the line. I knew that I had a path and I had a calling and I had skills that needed to be shared, and I was going to follow my voice, me, who I was. So radio was where I started, and then I think this may have been around May or June 1989, as I was walking down Suva, Victoria Parade, and the Tiki Togs main shop was on Victoria Parade, and Tanya was in there, and she saw me, and I don't really know how I was approached, but they approached me, and of course everyone knew the names, and I was like, me, little old me, of course. I was a bit more humble than that, of course. I was delighted. I was so thrilled, and it's not the first time my entry into fashion. I actually did have a fashion shoot happen way back when I was 13, and this was for Fiji Times, the lifestyle supplement, which at that stage was helmed by legendary journalist in Fiji, Debbie Singh, and also Renu Singh, who was a model back in the 70s and 80s, one of the top models of the time, and a journalist and photographer with Fiji Times. So they asked me if I could, because I had been known for my fashion sense and my flair and my audacity. So I was asked by them to, do that. So you may be seeing this photograph of a 13-year-old precocious me. And that shoot was pulled before it got to print because they found out who my father was, who was a member of parliament at that stage. And the editors went, nope, no, you're not doing that. So I'm glad, actually. It was a bit too young to be doing, to be modeling. I mean, I'm supposed to be representing womanhood. What was I doing? A child doing that, right? So back to 18 now. And Tiki Togs was the iconic fashion house, and Tiki Togs was the prestigious fashion parade of the society year. And it was held so this was the fashion parade, Hibiscus Fashion Parade, which was held during the Hibiscus Festival, which was the thing we all looked forward to during the year. It was held at Albert Park during those times. It was crowning. Look, it was all just caught up a little bit too much in society and racial tensions of things. But for those of us who weren't aware of all of that, and I certainly wasn't aware of any racial tension, despite being the daughter of a politician, and I understood that politics was all racially, dependent on the tension that was prevalent, but the rest of us seemed to get along quite well in a very multicultural society. Anyway, the things did change after the coup. I think people got a little bit more blatant about it. But anyway, so I was asked to be a model, and it was a was a wonderful thing. I was honored to be asked by legends and for such a prestigious show. Now I do wonder if it was because they were looking for someone of Indo-Fijian ancestry to be a little bit more multicultural and depicting and representing the society we have. And that's fine. If I was just chosen for my racial background, then so be it. They actually then got the bonus of me being very, very good at what I do. So, wow, 1989 Hibiscus Fashion Parade. Oh my goodness, I was the newbie walking with, the top models of the time. It was really amazing, and that's when I formed a partnership with my catwalk sister, and her name Zelda. And we were always paired together because we fell into a natural harmony. Both of us have very different walks, but we fell into a natural harmony walking together. And back then, runways were very much about having personality people on it to showcase the designer's vision. We weren't walking zombies. We were able to show our flair, but according to what the brief was for that show. So Anna Sweetman was very strict about how we were to be on stage and off stage, but I'll get to all of that later. Oh, wow. It was amazing. We would have rehearsals. It was always held at Suva Travelodge, Holiday Inn now, but Suva Travelodge was the place to be and seen, etc. And the Hibiscus Fashion Parade was always held on the Friday before the crowning on Saturday. So the Hibiscus Float Parade was on in the morning, and then the crowning of Miss Charity, and then the crowning of Miss Hibiscus at night. 1989 was extremely special for me because not only did I make my debut on runways as a model walking for the iconic Tiki Togs at the legendary Hibiscus Fashion Parade. That was so exciting, but I was also chosen to be part of the outside broadcast team, broadcasting and being the presenters, talking about the crowning and setting the ambience. This was a time before television, so we had to set the scene for people who couldn't make it to the crowning. We had to talk about what was happening on the night. We had to describe everything, describe people, not repeat ourselves. It takes great skill to do that, and I was amongst legends. I was standing next to Martha Tora, Yamniasi Ngonevo, who is better known as YG, legend of radio in Fiji. And Semi, and my apologies, I can't remember Semi's last name, but Semi was a legend of Indian radio and Radio Full Stop, and Salote Karoi, if I recall, of RF1. And we were all actually quite interestingly dressed in similar colors. It was beautiful in our finery because, we were there representing FBC, but also taking our jobs very seriously about calling who the winners will be. We have to announce, and we've got to describe and how it was a tense situation because drum roll, please, and the winner is. And that was one of the army, the Royal Fiji Military Forces band, etc., doing all of that. It was very exciting. I was on a high because the night before, as I said, I made my debut on Fiji runways as part of the Hibiscus Fashion Parade. And my gosh, that was fun. The styling of the time, 80s, but it was beautiful. Like so much of that, so many of the garments and pieces from that time, I would absolutely wear right now. It was such a wonderful, wonderful night, I remember. But also, it was the night I came face to face with racism. Prior to that, because of my upbringing all over the world, I had been a bit cocooned and shielded from racism. And from what we lived in Europe, we lived in England for a while, and I didn't realize that I had been subjected to it, but I could just water off, an oblivious global person. It wasn't until I actually walked that runway when someone shouted out, "Hey, it's Pamela Boards." I do know who this someone is. She is a person in society, not of society, but of the society we're all in. I remember her name very well, and I remember very well looking at her from up the stage and going, my gosh, you have some sort of weird courage to sit there and yell out racial slurs, etc., etc. And why I say being called Pamela Boards was not a slur, but it was derogatory because at that stage it was Pamela Boards was part of a scandal affecting British Parliament and very much an echo of the Profumo scandal of the 60s where Christine Keeler became a star out of that. Unfortunately, it didn't happen to Pamela Boards because Pamela Boards was of Indian ancestry and she was known as a socialite or just a party girl, but she was an escort. Pamela Singh, she was of Indian ancestry, and so therefore any female of Indo-Fijian background of Indian ancestry in society in Suva, sadly very racist now post-coup, anyone who had the audacity to have confidence in self was then cut down that way. And I was called Pamela Boards, and every time I'd come out, it'd be, "Hey, Bainey, Pamela Boards." And if you are watching from Fiji, you know that Bainey, when said like that, is not a compliment. Bainey means sister, but when we get called like that, Bainey, it's kind of, don't do that. It's derogatory. And I will look with withering glare like I did back then. And there is actually a photograph of me in a very kick-ass Tiki Togs outfit. I've got my hands in my pocket because that's one thing that has stayed with me. If you've ever been photographed by me or coached by me in modeling, then I always say keep your thumbs outside of your pockets, and that is an Anna Sweetman a tip that I have carried since 1989. That's so your hands don't look like stumps when you're photographed. And this photograph, I know I am giving a death stare to the person who is saying all these slurs to me. And I just know it's jealousy just coming off that. Well, all it did was defeat her purpose, because all it did for me was just make me more confident in my abilities. Anyway, so that was the Hibiscus Fashion Parade, and that was my debut. And from then on, well, I went on to become one of Fiji's top models. They call me Supermodel, and I will graciously and humbly accept that title, but I don't call myself that. I mean, I don't think a true supermodel does, but you have to acknowledge, well, it takes a lot of skill and flair and personality to be attributed or to be given that title. So from 1989, I don't quite recall too much, but onwards now we go to where I started with the third aspect of my career at that time.